Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuhu, and good day to each and everyone, especially to our course instructor, Ma'am Baydona Aliman. I am Johaini D. Tala, and I am the reporter in this lesson. Welcome to another lesson in our ELE 138, Literary Criticism. We are now in the lesson 8, the Russian Formalism. But before we dwell in our topic, let us know first the learning outcomes of this lesson. At the end of the lesson, the student should be able to define what is Russian formalism, discuss how to perform Russian formalism into practice, and perform a literary criticism on the given poem by utilizing Russian formalism as literary theory. Before we will know about the Russian formalism, let us know first the proponent of the theory. So the proponent of the Russian formalism is none other than Viktor Borisovich Slavsky. He was born on January 24, 1893 in St. Petersburg, Russia. Slavsky was fond of literature since his young years. In 1911, he published his first poems and stories. From 1912 to 1914, he studied at the Department of Philology of St. Petersburg University. Now let's proceed in what is Russian formalism. Russian formalism is distinctive for its emphasis on the functional role of literary devices and its original conception of literary history. So Russian formalism emphasizes on the role of literary devices and the original conception of literary history. Russian formalists advocated a scientific method for studying poetic language, to the exclusion of traditional psychological and cultural historical approaches. So Russian formalists, they advocated into a scientific method in studying poetic language. It means that it is in a more objective way. It included evidences and ex- it excluded the traditional psychological and cultural historical approaches in studying a language or a poetic language. It focuses solely on a text using the elements of literature and nothing else. So in Russian formalism, the theory focuses on a text, the elements of literature, and not in a outside context of that literature. It is mainly on the text. The meaning resides in the text, not in the reader, and we need to analyze the text to discover the meaning. The meaning of a text is only found in the text itself, not in the perception of the reader. It means that the reader should analyze the text itself to discover the meaning of that text. Now let's proceed to the history of Russian formalism. Russian formalism emerged around 1915 and flourished in the 1920s. Russian formalism consists of three groups. First is the Society for Study of Poetic Language, which is introduced or created by the proponent of Russian formalism, Viktor Slavsky. The next is the Moscow Linguistic Society, one of the leading figures of which was Roman Jacobson, and the last one is the Prague Linguistic Circle, established in 1926 with major figures as Boris and Viktor Slavsky. The school derives its name from form, as these critics studied the form of literary work rather than its content, emphasizing on the formal devices such as rhythm, meter, rhyme, metaphor, syntax, or narrative techniques. So the Russian formalism is derived its name from the word form, which is all the critics, they studied the literary work, the literary elements rather than the content of a literature. So it emphasizes on the devices like rhythm, meter, rhyme, metaphor, syntax, narrative technique, and so on. The Russian formalists, led by Viktor Slavsky, aimed to establish a science of literature. So they aim to establish science of literature, which means that it is a knowledge of the formal effects like devices, techniques, and so on, which will make up what is called literature. So the combination of the devices, techniques, and so on will make up what is literature. The formalists read literature to discover its literariness. So they read literature to discover the devices and elements that is introduced by the writer in order to make the language literary. So in Russian formalism theory, we have these different key ideas. The first one is wearing the device. This practice refers to the presentation of devices without any realistic motivation. They are presented purely as devices. In literature, in Russian formalism theory, the devices are purely devices. They did not represent any realistic formation or any realistic idea. It is purely a device used in a certain literature. The next one is defamiliarization. When we say defamiliarization, it is making strange of what is familiar. Everything must be dwelt upon and described as if for the first time. It is making strange of the already familiar things, to know the devices or elements used in a literature. Defamiliarization, it refers to the literary device whereby language is used in such a way that ordinary and familiar are made to look different. The next one is retardation of the narrative. The technique of delaying and protracting actions. Slavsky draws attention to the ways in which familiar actions are defamiliarized by being slowed down, thrown out, or interrupted. So retardation of the narrative will help the reader defamiliarize those familiar actions by it's like slowing down, zone out, or interrupted in reading every literature. It is the prolongation process of the perception. It is like interrupting the process of what is in the poem or work of art to know the devices elements used in a literature. The next one is naturalization. It refers to how we endlessly become inventive in finding ways of making sense of what is most random or chaotic utterances or discourse. Through naturalization, we defamiliarize and we bear every devices that is used in a literature. Then the next one is carnivalization. The term Michael Bakhtin uses to describe the shaping effect of a carnival on literary devices. That would be all. Thank you.